Prime Minister's address to the annual Conservative Party conference being held in Manchester. I'd said in the European Parliament yesterday that I thought she was a waste of space, and I thought that more Conservatives ought to start saying in public what they've been saying to me in private, namely that she should go. And I did say on this programme last night that I thought she was useless, but I think perhaps I rather underestimated not just her as Prime Minister, but perhaps the competence of the entire team around her. Let's begin with hearing what she had to say in Manchester this morning.
But we did not get the victory we wanted because our national campaign fell short. It was too scripted, too presidential, and it allowed the Labour Party to paint us as the voice of continuity when the public wanted to hear a message of change. I hold my hands up for that. I take responsibility. I led the campaign, and I am sorry.
Now, as the speech went on, it became increasingly clear that the Prime Minister was far from well.
The biggest expansion in training for doctors and nurses. and we shows what good the Chancellor's cough suite is.
Now, being ill is a very unfortunate situation for someone leading a party, most of all a Prime Minister. But let's just get a handle on this. So, for one, she had a persistent cough, and that was unfortunate. But one or two other things happened. I mean, to begin with, the slogan that was up there, I mean, it was rubbish. It was building a country that works for everyone. Well, years ago, Abraham Lincoln said that you can't please all of the people all of the time, and that is clearly what that slogan was trying to do. And the slogan itself would have been bad enough if, during her speech, believe it or believe it not, that slogan on the wall behind her, the letters, one by one, started to fall off down to the floor. I mean, talk about the wheels coming off. And then, in the middle of it all, a prankster. Now, he's a comedian. He's a guy called Lee Nelson. He's actually pretty clever in terms of what he does. So he runs up to the stage and hands the Prime Minister a P45. Now, on the face of it, you know what? It's quite funny. The shocking thing was that he was there with her for a considerable period of time. He then walked over to Boris and basically saying, look, Boris, you asked me to do this. And I just thought to myself, in terms of a security lapse, it was just totally extraordinary. And then, of course, there was the content, this British dream that she was talking about, and quite bizarre for a Tory conference that had said it was going to be about free markets and getting back to conservatism, but oh no, she wants to introduce legislation for a cap on the standard variable gas and electricity tariffs. And frankly, her programme to build more council housing, well, quite honestly, the numbers involved are so small, they frankly make no difference. But it's not really the content, I think, that today's about. It's about the Prime Minister. It's about this messaging that tries to appeal to everybody and in the end appeals to nobody. It's about the fact we've seen again and again and again a lack of sincerity, a lack of delivery, and she has, as I say, a team who can't even put together slogans on a wall that don't fall off, have clearly got no idea about security. Look, I've been there. I've spoken at 20 conferences for UKIP, over half of them as leader. I remember the manifesto launch in 2015 down in Thurrock, and I was really unwell, really suffering, high temperature, I was struggling, I was sweating, which of course led the commentators all to write I must have been out on the booze the night before, because, you know, there isn't much sympathy in politics. I also remember the first ever UKIP conference, 1993, London School of Economics, and during the national anthem at the end, the UKIP sign fell off the stage onto the floor, and I thought that was a disaster. But you know what? We were a brand new party, not one that's been around for a couple of hundred years and has governed the country repeatedly. And I just think all of this, personality, messaging, the team, I think it's all a complete disaster. And to me, her only real achievement as Prime Minister is by calling that early election. She has breathed life into an old-fashioned form of hard left socialism in the shape of Jeremy Corbyn and his sidekick, John McDonnell. And I believe that Corbyn will win the next election if Theresa May stays as Prime Minister. Do you agree with me or disagree with me? If you agree with me, call me on 0345 60 60 973. You may disagree, in which case you can text as a loyal Mayite and Tory 84850, and maybe, perhaps you think, really, we should just feel sorry for her. Well, if you do, you can tweet me using the hashtag Farage and LBC. You can watch us live on Facebook from here in London and comment there too. Is Corbyn going to rump the next election if May stays in position? I really think that's the case. John is calling from Westminster. He's a new caller. What do you think, John?
Oh, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I absolutely agree with you 100% that Corbyn will become Prime Minister if May continues. She was a disastrous Home Secretary. She's been a disaster as Prime Minister. She can't control her cabinet. And she couldn't even read the speech properly. Did you hear what she said about Corbyn causing a run on the ground?
Well, that could be the fact she had a heavy cold, John. We might just give her the benefit of the doubt on that one. But generally, generally, John, in terms of, what was the big takeout message from today? What was the big inspiration? What was the thing that made us think she would lead us to a good deal on Brexit? None of it was there, John, was it?
She was totally uninspiring, wasn't she?
She was.
She had nothing.
I mean, John, can I ask you, are you normally a Tory supporter, or...?
Unfortunately, yes.
So...
Yeah, I mean, Cameron fooled everybody with his magnificent speech when he was the candidate for the leader of the Conservative
Party. Back in
Party.
2005, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, David Davis didn't make such a good speech, but he would have been the right choice. And well, from what I've heard from activists who have been on LBC speaking, they think because Theresa May has made a plausible speech and she dealt with some heckler, that she's ideal as Prime Minister.
Bizarre.
She's not.
Bizarre.
She was disastrous Home Secretary, and that was an indication.
Oh, yeah, she failed to deliver, yeah. Totally.
And more than that, she didn't deal with the riots. At the time, the police did not have any leadership from her as Home Secretary as to how to deal with those riots. She was indecisive then, she's indecisive now. And she should have gone hell for leather at the European Union negotiators for criticising her. And criticising the government.
Very often it's a case of Theresa Maybe, isn't it, with her, I must say. Well, John, I tell you this, I was up in Manchester on Sunday with LBC. We went out and met a few people, interviewed a few people. Really interesting. You put a microphone in front of them and say, come on, surely it's time. You got a new leader. Oh, no, Theresa May's great. We're loyal to the leader. And as soon as you turn the microphone off, they say, gosh, she's hopeless, isn't she? And I think that's what's going on in Manchester. There are two different conversations. There's cabinet loyalty, although did you notice that Amber Rudd had to virtually put Boris in a half Nelson to get him to stand up and applaud? But there's what you're seeing in public and what's going on in private. And John, I thank you for your call. John, a Conservative, but almost embarrassed to admit that he is one with Theresa May as leader. He thinks Corbyn is going to win the next election if she stays. I believe that. I wonder what Adam, who's also from central London, thinks.
Hello, Nigel.
Good evening.
I think she's toast. You can roll out the other one. A goose is cooked.
Yes.
She looks thick as a parrot.
Yes.
But I must declare an interest as well, Nigel. I thought she was disgusting character. The way she gave the historic, the paedophile victims, the way she gave them the run around over the historic, cases of launching that inquiry when one chairman had to resign after the other. Was it Mrs. Sloss was the first one, then the other one from New Zealand had to resign.
Well, that was all. I mean, that's her time as Home Secretary, which I think we would all agree, Adam, was not particularly distinguished. So, if she stays on, does Corbyn win the next election, Adam?
I think they would have laughed you outside your local boozer a few months ago if you suggested that Corbyn would have been the next Prime Minister. But the more she's making, the Prime Minister's office like a laughing stock. It's so embarrassing, She's like Billy No Mates. Nobody's just... There must be one brave Conservative who could say, listen, listen, Theresa, it's time go off on your walking holiday, do something. There must be something else you want to get on with. But this country is in a serious state. People working themselves into, all jokes aside, Nigel, people working themselves into the ground. They're drowning in bills. You got young people, facing the horrific, consequence of having a £50,000 debt before, their careers even started. This is is a scandal. How any government, or, let alone the Western, the fifth richest economy, how we can't help our young students.
Yeah, well, no, Adam, there are lots of problems out there, and one of the difficulties in dealing with them is clearly we have a Prime Minister who cannot control her cabinet. Never a week seems to go by when the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Foreign Secretary don't contradict each other on a whole range of issues. Adam, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Oh, Nigel, give Theresa May a bit of credit. She was brilliant. Things went wrong that were out of her control, says Jenny. Jenny, when you're party leader, if the security goes wrong, if the signs fall off the wall, it means you haven't got the right team. It means you haven't delegated to the right people. And you, as leader, is where the buck stops. I know. I've been there. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. Prime Minister's speech at the Tory party conference today was cringe-makingly awful. Not because she had a cough. As I said already, I've had to give big speeches when I've been ill or under the weather. That's not the reason it was cringe-making. It's because of everything that went wrong around her and the fact that, once again, there was a lack of really good, clear leadership and messaging. But you have to give it to some of the cabinet for their loyalty, because Michael Gove tweeted out, I witnessed a great speech from a PM at the top of her game. Well, Michael, I'm sure you get marks for loyalty, but I'm not sure you get that many for honesty, because clearly she wasn't at the top of her game. It's very interesting. I was chatting earlier with a few of my colleagues, and I was stunned to find out, given that she's not been very well all week, just how much she'd done yesterday in terms of interviews. Surely she should have saved herself for the big day. And Madge has texted in, and she's absolutely on the money, because Madge says, Nigel, Mrs May is a control freak. She's had a bad cold for a week, and yet she did 24 interviews on Tuesday, knowing she had to do the big speech today. She should have delegated so she could rest her voice today. Madge, I think you are absolutely right. If you are ill, you have to shed things, you have to delegate and save yourself for the performance that you have to give. You can't avoid doing it regardless of how you feel. Craig disagrees with me on Facebook. He says, give us a break. Corbyn couldn't beat May at her worst. Really, Craig? I don't think so. Chris disagrees with you. He says May is completely incompetent at everything she does. Therefore, Corbyn will win the next general election if she remains as Tory leader. That is what I believe. Never accused you of being cruel, Nigel, but I do tonight. That's not entertainment I get on Twitter. I'm not being cruel. I'm not condemning her because she had a cough. I've explained. I've been in that position myself. It's horrid. It's just the content, the lack of leadership, the inability to control the warring factions that are there within her cabinet, and the fact she can't delegate, and those she does delegate to, finish up with the security system. I mean, the guy could have had a knife on him, for goodness sake. It isn't working. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to be cruel. Billy is calling from Harwich in Kent. Billy, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. First time we spoke. Please be gentle with me. I'm an old man.
Billy, welcome to the show. You're a first-time caller. You're on LBC. I'm not going to interrupt you. You say what you think.
Oh, okay. I think you're not being very fair with Theresa May. And by the way, I voted for the UKIP last time round.
Okay.
You know, she was the only one who picked up the poison chalice while this Brexit was going along when they had the leadership vote. All the others bowed out.
Well, I think, Billy, I mean, when it comes to being Prime Minister, others would have gone for it if they thought they might have come through. I mean, you know, you're not telling me that to fill the job of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, they had to sort of scrape round the corridors of Westminster. I mean, other people could have done it, Billy.
They could have done it, but they didn't, Nigel. Now, take yourself. You are a fantastic speaker. You really are. You talk the talk, but have you walked the walk yet? You've won nothing, Nigel.
Do you know something, Billy? I'm not going to have that from you, whatever your age is.
No, you carry on.
I'm not going to have that from you. I tell you what, Billy, not only did I win the European elections, which to win a national election had not been done for 110 years by a party that wasn't Labour or Tory, but I think I could argue, Billy, that if I hadn't been around, we probably wouldn't have had a referendum at all. So I think I have got a couple of chalk marks up on the board. But we're not discussing me, Billy. We're discussing the Prime Minister. And whatever the circumstances in which she took the position, the fact is, Billy, I put it to you that she's not controlling her party. She's not bringing the country with her. She appears to be pretty incompetent. And Billy, I put it to you, if she stays there, Corbyn is going to win the next election. What do you think of that?
I don't think so, Nigel.
Okay.
Where she's gone wrong, where Brexit is concerned, she should have Boris Johnson, Davis, Rees-Mogg, and you leading it.
But she doesn't,
and
Billy.
And then we'd have no problems whatsoever.
But, Billy, she doesn't. And here's the problem. There's a cabinet of 25 people, and 18 of them are Remainers, Billy.
I know. But unless they pull together. But if you look back at history, the Conservatives have so much infighting at times they pull themselves to pieces. Well, and this is what they're doing now.
You know, all political parties are good at infighting, believe me. I know a bit about that too. So, Billy, you think, despite everything, your view is she should stay on as Prime Minister up until the next election and it'll all be OK for the Conservatives?
Unless someone comes up, my vote is for Rees-Mogg.
Yep.
For the next leader.
Yep.
Someone like him, I think, could take the party forward and win.
So, Billy, you agree with me then that if the Tories had somebody else in charge, they'd have a better chance of beating Corbyn next time round?
I'll agree, but I think May will beat Corbyn.
All right, OK. OK, Billy, you've made your point. I thank you for your call. Billy, first-time caller. I was quite gentle with him. He said he was old. Didn't say how old. John from Liverpool is calling. John, am I right? If she stays on, does Corbyn win?
Hi, Nigel. I never thought I'd say this, but yes, you are correct.
Right. Okay.
I think if she carries on, then that's the end of the Tories in the way they're going. And I think a lot of people are getting sidetracked with today's speech about having a sore throat and a prankster and things falling apart. It's not about that. A lot of people are now having a bit of sympathy for her. Oh, poor Theresa May. But she's the Prime Minister. This stuff happens. She should be able to deal with it, and it shouldn't be an issue. Yeah, so people need to look at the content.
John,
of that speech.
I think we can be sympathetic to somebody on a human level, but I don't think if a leader starts to attract sympathy, that's a very good place to be. A leader doesn't need to be liked, but a leader must command respect, John, it seems to me.
Exactly, and in the speech, I mean, regarding content, there wasn't much to it.
So marks out of 10, John, for the content.
2.
Presentation?
1.
John from Liverpool, great call. Thank you. Verity says to me on Facebook about Michael Gove. I read out his tweet earlier. I wouldn't trust him to put out the rubbish. Sue, which Prime Minister was Gove watching? Tina says, I'm convinced if May stays in, Corbyn will storm to power. Lisa says, I think her speech was brilliant. And what a shame more focus was put on a sore throat. What a sad world. Poor lady. OK. I know there is emphasis being put on the cough and the glass of water and the cough suite. I, on this show, am not doing that, all right? And I'm not doing it because I understand, as I said, when I helped to launch the UKIP manifesto in 2015, I was not at my best. You know, not for the reasons the press wrote, who said I was hungover and boozed up and sweating. I was ill, you know. It just shows you there wasn't any sympathy for me, goodness gracious. Perhaps I didn't deserve any. But I'm not criticising her for having a cold. I do think she could have saved herself yesterday. I do think she could have been perhaps have gone into this in better condition. The content was poor. The message, completely unclear. I mean, what are these slogans she comes up with? Building a country that works for everyone. I mean, please, surely somebody can do better than that. Darryl is calling me from Uxbridge in Greater London. Darryl, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. You've never called me before. What's motivated you?
I was listening to you talking about how Corbyn is going to sort of sweep the floor with May in the next election.
Yes.
I just wondered, who do you think should be leading the Tory party?
OK, you put me on the spot. Darryl, if it's her, they are doomed. They are just doomed. And I say that because the number of people I meet who are traditional Conservative supporters, I'm just not sure they'd even be bothered to walk down to the local primary school to vote if she's still there. I think the Conservative Party needs to be a little bit clearer about what it is, make its mind up which side of the Brexit divide it's on, decide whether it believes in state solutions or free market solutions, and have a bit more clarity. And I'm beginning to think, do you know, I've over the last few weeks, much as I like Jacob Rees-Mogg personally, I have said to callers, look, you know, you must be drinking moonshine. Nobody comes from the backbenches and becomes the Tory party leader. I'm beginning to wonder whether he's developing a similar kind of momentum in the Conservative Party that Corbyn did in the Labour Party. Remember, Darryl, Corbyn was a backbencher. 33 years in Parliament, never held a position, never chaired a committee, never been a spokesman, and yet everybody said it was impossible, but he swept to power in the Labour Party. I'm beginning to think, Darryl, that Mogg could do it. And what is interesting about Mogg is, and you may like what he stands for, you may loathe what he stands for, but there's never any confusion about where Jacob stands on any single issue. So, Darryl, I think the Tory party needs to be clear which side of the fence it's on. It'll need a leader that is intellectually brave and robust, prepared to put up with the criticisms, not try to pander to everybody with pathetic slogans like building a country that works for everyone. So, Darryl, right now, if you ask me, I think Jacob would actually be the right guy for them. What do you think?
I agree with you entirely, but I also think that for speech making, Boris Johnson is wonderful at speech making.
Oh, certainly.
Rousing the troops, as it was.
Yes.
But I say, Mrs. May, if she's writing her own speeches, she shouldn't be doing it. And if she's getting someone else to write her speeches, sack them.
But Darryl, that's the point. Either way, it's not working, is it? You know, whether it's her or somebody else, it isn't working. Darryl, thank you very, very much indeed for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. Amidst accusations that I'm being cruel about the Prime Minister because she had a cough today, no, I'm not. It's not because she had a cough. It's because the security was no good. The stage set started to fall apart. The content of the speech was hopeless and the cabinet split down the middle, and in Brexit we're letting the other side dictate to us. For all of those reasons, I believe if she stays as Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn will win the next election, and not one of you yet tonight has convinced me that I'm wrong. Now, can I just pick up for a moment on last night's show? I talked about Catalonia, the fact that nearly 900 people have been injured by the Spanish police as they went out to try to vote in that referendum on Sunday. Yeah, sure, the referendum had not been approved nationally in Spain, but surely the intelligent thing would have been to allow the Catalans to vote, not to prevent them, and then to say the vote had no legal force. And I was fiercely critical of Mr. Juncker yesterday, who in his big speech of the month in the European Parliament, didn't even refer to it. Yet the European Commission talking about how fragmentation would not be helpful. Interesting. Today, Frans Timmermans, who is the direct deputy to Mr. Juncker, this is what he said today. He said, violence is not the way, but proportionate use of force is sometimes necessary. Isn't that what they were saying about Hungary in 1956 and the Prague Spring in 1968? This is scary, folks, and let me tell you why. Because today, the Spanish government have dispatched 16,000 troops, not police, troops, the army, and they're waiting in 3 cruisers off the coastline of Catalonia, waiting for the next instalment. And we're told the leader of the Catalans is going to declare independence for Catalonia at some point in the next week. It is a serious situation. It is violent. It is ugly. It looks to me that it may get somewhat worse. And I think for the Spanish government to have behaved like this, for the European Commission now to be openly supporting the Spanish, not far from condemning violence, supporting what the Spanish government have done, they can't have made a bigger mistake. And some of those callers we had on the show last night, and I have to say overnight, I had several hundred emails come into me from Catalonia and other parts of Spain, and I think all the Spanish government have done is to virtually guarantee that the Catalan independence movement is about to get a whole lot stronger. Also, talking of last night, I did a Brexit business briefing last night. I gave you some fresh, up-to-date news on some economic stats that you certainly won't hear on the BBC or anywhere else where they're trying to be negative. If you want to hear some Brexit good news and you missed last night, go to lbc.co.uk, where a lot of people are looking at it and I think taking cheer. Back to May Corbyn, our Prime Minister, the catastrophic day that she's had. And Gordon is calling me from Westbury in Wiltshire. Gordon, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I totally agree with you. Well, you know, she's doing everything for the Labour Party. Corbyn is just going to walk it. She's showing herself to be very weak, and Corbyn must be just loving it. He must be thinking, let it carry on.
Yeah, he doesn't need to do an awful lot, Gordon,
no,
does he really?
He doesn't need to do nothing. You know, she's just shown herself to be a weak leader. Europe, I mean, she's just letting them dictate. I mean, with the greatest respect, she's a second lady leader of the Tory party. Margaret Thatcher, she'd go across and say, right, we'll pay you up to the day it finishes. After that, no severance money.
Yep.
That's it. We're gone. We're finished. And she'd have just turned around and walked away, and they'd all looked at her and said, well, OK, then perhaps we better accept that. But she's not being strong. She's made an absolute harlot to the election. She's shown us to be weak as a country. We need to be strong, and we just say, this is what we're going to do. We want to do it like this. We're going to do it like this. You lot can do what you want, but this is what we're doing. And, you know, and dictate it. She's allowing them to dictate to us. And it's going to be a right harlot. It's going to be a right mess.
So should the Tory party ditch her, Gordon, and ditch her quick?
Yes. She has to.
So how is it, Gordon? Right? How is it that you down there in the delightful market town of Westbury and me up here in Leicester Square tonight, we can see this very clearly, that it's not working. Doesn't make her a bad person, it's just not working. She's not right for the job. How is it in the face of that intelligent people like Michael Gove send out tweets saying that it was a great speech from a leader on top of her game? How does that work, Gordon?
Yeah, well, any sensible person knows he's talking a load of crap.
Whoa.
You know, with the greatest respect,
yeah.
You know, we all know why they're saying it, because they don't want to step out of line. But we want somebody who's prepared to step out of line. We want a conviction politician, someone who's prepared to stand out from the crowd and say, look, this is what we need, this is what we want. You know, I would like you to be leader of the Tory party, but that's not going to happen.
No.
You speak the truth.
No,
you
they wouldn't.
Speak from the heart.
Gordon, they wouldn't let me in through the front door. Don't worry about that. But in the absence of me, who do you think could do the job and do it well and beat Corbyn next time round?
Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg.
OK, Gordon, terrific. Thank you for your call. Gordon there, very clear in what he stands for. Push the language a bit further than we like at this time of day, but a lot of passion. Mandy's calling from Leicestershire. Mandy, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
You're a new caller. What do you think, Mandy?
Well, basically, please don't all your callers 99% hate me, but I am actually a Corbyn supporter.
OK, that's fine. It's a democracy, Mandy. That's great. Well, I tell you what, if you're a Corbyn supporter, you've had a pretty good day, haven't you?
Well, I wouldn't say judging her day would actually make me sort of like happy in the fact that, you know, I think he'd breathe it like everyone else is saying. But I was actually... I'm not pitying her, but I just thought, what a dreadful, dreadful, dreadful day the Conservatives have had, to be honest. I would be embarrassed to call myself a Conservative. I really, really would. It was just cringy. It was cringy. And It wasn't a case of like Corbyn's going to storm it because of that. I mean, I'd like to see Jacob Rees-Mogg sort of run the Conservative Party, because Corbyn would absolutely, would actually storm it, basically. That's my opinion.
What, because of policy?
Absolutely. If he was leader, then Corbyn would absolutely storm it through to PM.
Well, do you know what, Mandy? Do you know what? If Jacob was leader of the Tory party and Corbyn stayed leader of the Labour Party, at least we would have an election with genuine differences of ideology. It would almost be back to sort of Thatcher v Michael Foot.
Absolutely.
Real politics where we have where we have a proper debate, and hopefully without all the vile language. And I have to say, Mandy, that and I'm not accusing your leader of this, but one or two of the people who support him are very unpleasant. I saw them.
I appreciate that, and there's people in every party that are, can be like that.
Yes, there's just rather more supporting him. But anyway, that's by the by. That's by the by. But
again, as you say, it would be left versus right.
It would be a healthy, democratic debate. We'd make a decision. And hopefully, as a Brexit country, back in charge, of our trade policy and our economic policy, and indeed, our industrial policy in terms of pay and unions and work conditions and all of those things.
More likely working for the same. Obviously, Corbyn is, a Europhobe, basically. He does actually support, he's not a Remainer, basically.
Well, we know that. The trouble is he's being held a bit hostage by his own parliamentary party. But I tell you what, Mandy, we will discuss Corbyn and that dilemma, and I'd welcome you to call again. Mandy, I thank you. Actually, wouldn't it be healthy? Because what we had today was a Conservative Prime Minister effectively sounding a bit like a Labour one, wanting to introduce caps on energy prices. There hasn't been for years enough clear ideological distinction. That's my view. Kaz is calling from Chigwell. Kaz, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me on.
So, am I right or wrong? If May stays, does Corbyn win?
Well, you touched on a very important point, and I think we all have to be a little bit fair to Theresa May here. Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about if she's still in power, if she's still Prime Minister at the next general election, then Corbyn will, walk all over. I think the real, I guess, the reality of things is that, regardless of whether it's Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson or Michael Gove, whoever is leading the Tory party, Corbyn is going to win, and the writing's on the wall. The proof is in the pudding. The results of the general election just gone are pretty indicative, and I think it's quite ominous that Corbyn will win. Really.
Well, it looks to me, Kaz, it's heading in that direction. But if the Tory party chose a different leader with a bit more oomph and a bit more positivity, might that then be different?
I think possibly it might be. It's really the momentum and all of the populist movement is very much with Corbyn himself. So, I guess only time will tell. 4.5 years is
long time.
It is a long time, isn't it? So,
no, it is a long time. But you agree, Kaz, they're going in the wrong direction with her as leader.
Absolutely, yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Kev says on Facebook, the Tories have turned this country into an international joke. Do you know something? I'm not quite sure that's true, but can you imagine how it looks to the world that the Prime Minister is addressing her annual conference, that our security is so lax that a chap runs out of the crowd, holds a P45, is then able to have a 20-second conversation with Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, and then the slogan on the wall behind the Prime Minister starts to fall down to the floor. I mean, if we saw this in a poor African country, we think they're in a bit of a mess. And this was the Prime Minister at her annual conference. Not good, not pretty, embarrassing in my view. She'll lose the next election. They've got to get somebody else. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. A shambolic day for the Prime Minister in Manchester. Not a good advert for the country on the world stage. The set falling apart. The security so lax that a comedian comes out of the crowd and gives the Prime Minister a P45. Messaging the frank left and the right, which is not what most Tory voters actually want. And yes, she had a bad cough too. We'll forgive her that. that can happen absolutely to anybody. But before I return to your calls, and I want you to tell me that I'm wrong, tell me that if she stays as PM, she can beat Corbyn next time round, because I don't believe it. But let me know if that's what you think. Before that, I'm looking to have a private lunch with somebody. We're going to do it for charity. We're going to do it at Franco's Italian restaurant here in the centre of London, and they will give us a 3-course lunch. And if you're that way inclined, we could even have a glass of something, and we'll do it on a Friday when I'm not broadcasting in the evening, and we'll do it for Global's Make Some Noise charity. And what they do is they help youngsters and their families living with severe illness, disability, or a lack of opportunity. To bid for this prize, go to lbc.co.uk, and the auction is open until 7:45 p.m. Thursday the 5th of October. You've got to be over 18 to enter. As I say, go to lbc.co.uk to bid, and you can see the all-important terms and conditions. Now, you know, at the moment, we're at nearly 6,000 sterling for that particular charity lunch. But if that is too expensive, but you'd like to come and see me again for Global Radio's Make Some Noise charity, then I'll be on stage on the 10th of January at the Hippodrome Casino here in central London. You can join me for the evening. You, again, go to lbc.co.uk to get the tickets. Prices start for £85. And again, you'll see there the terms and conditions. Back to Mark in Ealing. Mark, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, am I right or wrong about Mrs. May?
Oh, yeah, she's absolutely hopeless. I mean, what we've seen is a complete shambles of a fortnight. I mean, can you remember a British Prime Minister having a worse fortnight than what we've seen?
I think Gordon Brown had some tricky times, yeah, but I think
we're coming up to this sort of podium of worst politicians in living memory. I mean, between the Florence speech, the Andrew Marr interview,
yep,
and then this Conservative conference speech, it's bad to worse. I mean, where do we, how much lower are we going to go?
So, Mark, okay, Mark, I mean, to some extent, Mark, I'm with you, but let me ask you this, because I can't really answer this, right? I made the point yesterday and today that when I talk to Conservatives in a public setting, they support the Prime Minister. When I talk to them in a private setting, they think she ought to go. So what's holding them back? Why don't they say something?
This is the question I have for you, Nigel, is that, as a Brexit supporter, what we've seen is just complete capitulation from both the left and the right. I mean, the Labour conference is just, Corbyn's done a complete 180. It's,
yes,
he's now the biggest cheerleader for Europe. Now we see the Tories have completely backslided on everything in the last fortnight. And so as a real genuine Brexit supporter, what I was hoping to see through the Tory conference was that the grassroots Tories, whether we call that the Momentum Group or who you want to call that, we'd see them genuinely rising up. That you'd hear reports coming through whether it was from the Conservative Home website or through the mainstream media of a sort of fringe events where a movement is going to take hold, where whether it's your more centrist Boris Johnson or whether it's your Jacob Rees-Mogg would come in, we'd see some activity trying to usurp. What we get is it's King Jong-un, it's sort of your North Korean everybody's here for the dear
leader,
and it's a dear leader, and so
do you know, Mark? That thought process that you're going through is exactly the same one I went through at the time of the Maastricht Treaty a quarter of a century ago. I thought, I know all these MPs, all these people in the party are vehemently opposed to this treaty. Surely at some point they're going to rise up, they're going to put their own beliefs and the interests of the country as they see it above this ridiculous concept of party unity. And do you know, Mark, I was wrong. So I left the Conservative Party and I got involved with UKIP right at the very beginning because I thought they would always put loyalty to party before the cause and the country. And I'm beginning to think, Mark, we're seeing exactly that same phenomenon 25 years on. The majority of that hall in Manchester, I bet you it's 75% plus of them, voted Brexit, want Brexit. In private, they think the whole thing is a shambles, but they don't want to be disloyal. That's the best. That's the best I can do, Mark. Is there any other explanation?
I don't know that there is. I mean, I guess there's a reason why I never voted for any political party in my life except for Brexit. Because
yes,
I wasn't voting for politicians. I was voting for a principle. and that you cannot trust your politicians to.
So Mark, you're one of those voters. You're one of those voters that Sir Alan Duncan described in very condescending terms, that you don't normally vote in elections. You turned out and you threw a tantrum, Mark. Is that right?
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, I conscientiously object from voting, but on an issue such as Brexit, there's principles upon which I would vote for.
If there was a party, Mark, if there was a party that you trusted and thought was decent and honest and everything else, that was there at the next election to try and push Brexit through, would you be tempted to vote for it?
Well, I'd be going against my principles if I do that, Nigel.
OK, fine. So you've got to wait, Mark, for another referendum to vote, basically.
Exactly. I believe in direct democracy.
Yeah, so do I.
I think that the referendums are the way that you get the will of the people.
No, Mark, I agree with you. We need more direct democracy in this country. Absolutely, great call. Thank you, Nigel. What would Mrs May need to do to gain your support? Says Chris. Oh, that's easy, Chris. That's easy. If you'd been listening back in January when she delivered the Lancaster House speech, and I was here sitting in this studio, and I said, what a terrific speech we'd heard from the Prime Minister. I never thought I'd see the day when a British Prime Minister used words and phrases that I'd used and been condemned for 20 years. And I absolutely supported her in everything she said. All she now had to do was to deliver. And look at it. She's backslided, she's dithered, she's delayed. She hasn't got my confidence at all. But I was prepared, absolutely prepared, to give her more than the benefit of the doubt. But like millions, I listened to what she said. I tried to erase from my mind her failure as Home Secretary. I wanted to believe, as Prime Minister, that when she said Brexit means Brexit, that she meant it. She clearly didn't. Dan in Watford is my next caller. Dan, good evening.
Good evening to you, Nigel. I just wanted to tell you a bit of a story about myself. So I've emigrated to the great UK in 1990, and I've got a couple of companies, I've got a few employees, so I've done quite well for myself.
Well done.
And look, I've got to say, when I was listening to Ms. or Mrs. May today, I felt really proud to be British. I thought, this was a good decision. All them years ago to come to this country, I was really proud, and I'll tell you for why. She was talking about really sort of aspirational ideas. All right, the free market, the UK's role in the world, student debts coming down, the housing market being fixed.
But it was.
I just think.
But Dan, it was all
really laying into her.
But Dan, it was all tiddly. It was all fiddling at the edges. What they're going to do for student debt is minuscule. What they're going to do for housing doesn't even address a tiny percentage of it. And as for the free market, she contradicted that by wanting to cap energy prices. That's the problem, Dan. Maybe sometimes the rhetoric's good, the delivery's, but the delivery itself is not great. Anyway, you're a supporter, Dan. Do you think? And clearly you like what she had to say. Do you think she can beat Corbyn at the next election?
Yeah, because I think Corbyn's a Marxist. I think he's sort of going out making promises willy-nilly, which he has no clue about how to fund. Right. Unfortunately, you've got a very large gullible electorate. I'm sorry to say this. I don't mean to sound sort of condescending or anything like that, but people like to believe in what's good for them, right? So he's going to say... You know what I mean? So he's got an easy sell. Right?
Dan, he's got an easy sell, but, you haven't convinced me. You haven't convinced me. You like what you said. You haven't convinced me. My view on this, I stick to it. May is a disaster. She's no good as Prime Minister. She's not a leader. If she stays, Corbyn wins the next election. The Tory party need to discover some guts and backbone and start saying in public what they're saying to me in private.